We face multiple crises, including climate change, species extinction, the coronavirus pandemic, and the worst economic recession since World War II. In addition, with just 10 years to go, many of the Sustainable Development Goals are off track. It would be understandable in such circumstances to be pessimistic, but that is not the position of global civil society. Organizations from more than 80 countries have been discussing practical solutions intended to restore hope.
The world is facing an unprecedented challenge with COVID. Even before COVID, there was much work to be done on reducing inequalities, addressing injustice, reaching the most vulnerable. These issues, injustice, inequality, vulnerability, they're not inevitable. But we, civil society, need to work with G20 leaders, need to work with all the relevant stakeholders to include the voices of the most marginalized, to address the issues head on. A bright future is definitely possible, but we need to make serious reforms today.
The one thing that I would convey to G20 leaders is that in their deliberations, the first standard by which they need to evaluate their decisions must be the good of all humanity. They must set aside for just a moment their national interests and recognize that all of humanity needs the coordination of these major powers. And without it, all of us will suffer. And so the G20, like the United Nations, is a place where countries not only can, but need to take off their constituency-based hats and put on the needs of all of humanity and then derive policy. And sometimes that may mean that the policies are not exactly in their short-term interest, but over the long run, it will benefit all.
Crisis did not start with COVID-19. It exacerbated the global systemic failures and inequalities. G20 must commit to a bold global systemic reform for an inclusive recovery, with a debt service cancellation, considering countries' vulnerabilities, a comprehensive sovereign debt restructuring mechanism, the injection of liquidity through the issuance of special drawing rights, and a global tax reform for an inclusive decision-making process.
G20 countries are responsible for approximately 80% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Their policies affect the whole world. All over the world, people are protesting against an economic system that is destroying our climate and ecosystems vital for our survival. Safeguarding the planet, that is one of this year's G20 priorities. What we need now is concrete action, together on the international level as well as on national level. Words are not enough.
We have a different perspective. The most vulnerable first. It's not a dream. It's the path of human rights. So our call to G20 is to share efforts and financial resources at the service of United Nations initiative to promote human rights and peace. And at the same time, we call all the G20 members for strengthening at home the rule of law. It's the only way to provide full respect of human rights, to provide dignity for all.